Good afternoon, and we are back here with the truth about local government. And today we're talking about co-creation and its impact on building community bonds with an expert in this field, and that is Sophie Evans, Director of Customer Delivery at the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. It's Friday afternoon, Sophie. So, but firstly, thank you for coming on and talking about this topic with us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, what is co-creation first? Let's just talk about that first. To lay the foundation, what is it?
Um, I think we talk about it a lot, but I think genuinely, in its purest form, and I think there are different definitions, but it's about starting with a blank sheet of paper with users of a service and people who provide and design that service to figure out what it should look like and how it should function. And I think what we tend towards, which is much easier, is like a deeper consultation or seeking people's views. But I think co-creation is much sharper than that and a little bit more scary, frankly.
Now, it's a really interesting concept, and I guess the first step is, how do you start that process? How do you start doing co-design with communities?
Okay, so the kind of example that we've worked on, which we're very proud of, is our service standards. And I think for us, obviously, we have a history in Kensington and Chelsea. That means we have a lot of work to do to re-establish trust and confidence with our residents. And what we used is our customer strategy to make sure that that was the kind of set the vision and the pace for what we wanted to achieve. Um, and the strategy recognised that it's inevitable that people have contact with the council. We call them customers, but actually there's an inevitability about it. Everybody has contact with the council, but it shouldn't be difficult and it shouldn't be painful. Um, and there is an opportunity for every contact with a council for a resident for it to increase their trust and their confidence and the credibility of that. So those individual pieces of contact are incredible in terms of the reputation of the council and how residents feel about it. So when we were setting out our strategy, one of the things that we felt would help us to achieve that was an aim to make sure that we value the people we talk to, treat them with respect and dignity, listen to them when they speak, and take the time and trouble to understand what it is they're telling us they need. And I mean, it sounds so obvious, doesn't it? But the reality is, in a kind of busy work environment, when we're under pressure and there are all kind of other things going on, actually, sometimes that doesn't happen. Um, and so what we wanted to do is make sure that we emphasise the value and the importance of that resident contact and interaction for every member of staff. And one of the things that we felt was standing in our way is that we had a bit of a patchwork of service standards across the organisation. So different services had different service standards, different services maybe didn't have a service standard. So how could you make sure there was consistent good experience for residents and they felt like they were respected and trusted and valued? So that was the starting point for us, was let's start by understanding how you would define and explain to staff what a good interaction looks like and feels like. So that was the kind of what we needed to do. And I think the reason we felt that co-production was really important here is when, it's quite easy to write a set of service standards. All organisations have got them. But what we were finding is they tended to less be a set of, well, they probably were more about the organisation telling people what they could expect and setting the rules rather than saying, what the experience really should be like. So they tend to be, we'll answer the phone within 5 rings. We'll get back to your email within 3 working days. You won't have to wait for longer than an hour at our service centre. And sometimes there's even things in there like we won't tolerate any, abuse of our staff. And so they're quite transactional, they're quite impersonal, and they're kind of broadcasting to people what we think we want our service to operate like from a staff perspective. And we needed to turn that on its head if we were going to really reach that nirvana of making people feel like we actually cared about them when we spoke to them. So that's why we felt actually the best people to tell us what a service standard should be for interaction with a resident are residents. And that was when we kind of committed to that process for doing it.
Now, for a lot of councils out there, that probably terrifies them having a consistent standard across the council because you really are putting yourself out there and having a sense of transparency with your with the kind of your community base. Having been on that journey, having established a set of consistent standards across the organisation, what have you learned from that process? What advice would you give to other people who either have the same role as you or are kind of involved in a transformation process? How do you bring different fractions of the same organisation under a consistent banner of standards?
That's really hard. So I think we've done a number of things around that, and I'm not suggesting we're there yet. You know, we've got work still to do. First of all, we asked the residents to help us with an implementation plan, so that was really helpful. There was lots and lots of communication, first of all, and that communication really centered in on the fact that residents had taken the time and the trouble to help us write these and to express what they wanted from us, and that we needed now to respect that time, respect what they had invested in, and as an organisation respond to it. I think it was a little bit easier because what the process produced was so different from what you might expect. So the process did not produce something that said, you have to answer within 15 minutes, or my email, and I expect it to be answered quickly. And it was much more about, we understand that you can't always do what we need you to do, but please, you know, help us out. Make sure you're signposting us to people where we can get help. Be clear and transparent. Don't don't um don't take the role of a kind of patriotic organization with us. Have a relationship with us when you're on the phone. Make us feel like you actually are interested in what we're saying. And they are very human qualities. And actually, I think that appealed to people's sense of how they want to operate at work. So I think there was something in what the residents created with us that kind of made the process attractive to staff. But we've got so many strands of work to try and nail this. So we have, first of all, there's lots of communication, obviously. We've written a set of behaviours and a toolkit for managers and staff on what those behaviours look like. We've got a whole syllabus of training that goes through the entire employee life cycle, so not just when you join. Residents have also helped us write interview questions for staff, so that when we hold interviews, we are actually looking for people who want to work in this way. We've also developed a maturity model, which is a bit of fancy language, isn't it, really? But it's a way in which we can describe what good looks like if you're delivering these service standards. And we're taking every service in the organisation through a self-assessment against that, so that they start to take some ownership of it. They reflect honestly on where they think they are, and then they come up with an action plan about what's going to be delivered against that. We report regularly to members. We're developing much better metrics in terms of what we're seeing and what residents are feeling about the interaction. So it's I think it's a really massive undertaking, because it's almost, it relies on every person in the organisation. But I think what we're doing is using all the mechanisms of the organisation, organisational development, training, recruitment, performance management, leadership, to try and really embed it in the culture. So it's a kind of headline that everybody thinks about when they come into the office and when they work.
It's an identity that you all live by and all kind of commit to at the outset. But I guess around co-creation, one of my the conversations I have regularly around co-creation or around engaging with the community is when you have such a diverse community, and I appreciate it might be different for you guys because of the kind of the circumstances that in the last few years that the organizations had to come through and the communities had to come through. But sometimes when you think about the people that normally interact with local government, there tends to be normally people maybe retired, middle class. I don't want to make any kind of generalized assumptions, but it's normally not the full spectrum of people that live within that community. How do you ensure that your co-creation is co-creation that represents the true variety and kind of like variety of that community, and not just the section that has engaged?
Yeah, so the process we followed really helped with this, and I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it certainly helped. So we started. There were two things we did very early on. The first thing we did was we put a kind of tender out to voluntary and community sector organisations in the borough to facilitate the exercise. So it was not going to be facilitated by the council. It was going to be facilitated by someone independent, but who understood the area and who had enough connections across community groups and community organisations to be able to kind of bring that to bear on the discussion. So I think that was an important bit. The other thing we did was we advertised, so we put out across social media and media for a period of months, advertising and asking for residents to participate. We got about 70 or 80 applicants. And then what we did was we matched that against the demographics of the borough to make sure that we had a smaller group of people that were broadly representative, both in terms of geography of where they lived, age, and other characteristics as well. So we tried to make sure that we had, and you can't do it. You can't do it well enough, but we did try and make sure that we had some representation. We didn't go, for example, to existing groups and existing residents associations and tenants associations. We actually went out through the media to get applications, and I think that helped to make sure we had a range of voices around the table, a range of experiences, and a different range of expectations. And I think that brought a richness in terms of diversity to the process that gave us much more confidence that what we were hearing would provide would reflect the voices of many of the people in the borough.
I think it's great. I mean, you've not only there you utilize data effectively, which is fantastic, but also you've been aware at the outset of that problem, because I think sometimes people forget about it, and then it's only when you get to the point of presenting your conclusions you're like, oh shit, the our foundational data is inaccurate.
Yeah.
So, you've talked about community though, and you talked about communication. Did you have to set some ground rules at the front end though, in terms of, or with kind of your community partners as to how to communicate? Or was it very much guys come in, innovate, collaborate, express how you want to express? How did you communicate? How do you set the ground rules?
So the ground rules were created by the group. So the group involved residents. There's a group of about a dozen residents drawn from that group. There were a couple of frontline members of staff that were involved because we wanted residents to be able to kind of understand and listen and inquire about that process and take part in it. Our lead member attended some sessions as well to make sure that was, there was some kind of leadership involvement and a reflection of how important it was to the organisation. But they set the rules themselves. And we were very clear with our senior stakeholders, leaders, members of the leadership team and kind of, senior execs, that they were going to have to listen to what came back up front, and that actually, there wasn't going to be a changing of what came through once it came back. And I think they were very brave to accept that and go with that. And I think it brought some honesty and trust to the process by virtue of the fact that the group set their own boundaries and set their own rules. And because there was a range of people in there, including some staff, I think it allowed them to explore routes and then understand their consequences and then decide together whether that was feasible or not, rather than, there being red lines before you even set out in terms of what you can and can't do. So actually we were very open, and that made the quality of what we produced much better, I think.
Do you think that the bravery that the leadership at the council showed from the officers I'm referring to here was off the background of the consequence? Do you think that other lead officers, would be as brave to take such honest feedback? I mean, do you think that's this? Kind of, it's not. I'm asking specifically about, because obviously there is a unique set of circumstances there. Do you think that was kind of a catalyst for this standards been coming through? What was the catalyst for you wanting to create these standards?
Yes, I mean, I would say that everything, every day that you do in Kensington and Chelsea is against that backdrop of that dreadful, dreadful tragedy. I can honestly say, I wanted to work there to be part of that work, but even I was surprised when I get that how it infiltrates everything. So I think it does affect how we work, and it does mean that we probably want to go a step further. We kind of feel that we need to. There's an imperative that we have in terms of recovery as an organisation, and with a traumatized community, how do you start to kind of be part of that healing, and how do you try and move on as an organisation if it isn't by being, as ambitious as you can for the people who live in your borough. And that sounds very noble, but it genuinely is, I think, the leadership view in the organisation, and that gives great permission to staff to be able to start thinking about being connected to their work in a slightly different way. And
There's
I
a
think
real
that's
sense of
really
equity. Everyone I
powerful.
speak to at Kensington and Chelsea who works there in an officer or member capacity is so there's a level of emotional investment that is above the standard within the industry, I would say. And as awful as that circumstance is, and there's no getting away from that, and neither should nor should we. But I think the fact that what you guys are doing and creating this really positive precedent, which then can be relayed and utilized by other councils who can have the positive consequences on the learning process that your organization has been on, but without that, obviously, that trauma. And again, trauma is different in different councils, and I'm not, diminishing one trauma for another, but it's important, I think, that there is such a need to build trust with our communities. And again, it comes back to it. You look at the turnout in local elections. It's so low, and I guess there are the extremes like within Kensington and Chelsea, but there also, there are other aspects of, where, but there is a need to have that engagement piece. But I just think it's wonderful what you've done in creating that standard design. Just to kind of summarize then, what would you say the three things that officers at a senior level, and in fact, officers at all levels need to think about when they're thinking about co-creation within their service functions?
Well, so definitely go in with an open mind and a blank sheet of paper, and trust the people that you are involving to be as committed, as serious, as reasonable as as you are as an officer. They we are we are so much more connected to our communities than we realize sometimes. I think, we are all the same people, experiencing councils of our own that we live in. We're very sort of similar experiences of our own council. So actually, I think there's something about trusting that process and trusting those people, and that kind of trusting environment will yield the best work. But I think if you started with some red lines and some boundaries and I think you just wouldn't get the same quality of work out of it. I think the other thing I would say is how massively the staff who were involved were impacted by it. I cannot say how motivating and energizing they found it. I think that's something about finally being able to get close to residents and actually work with them on something over a period of, I don't know, 8, 10 sessions. And how we don't often get to do that in services in the council. So I think there was something about that speaks to the heart of what many people work in local government for, because of their kind of values and how they feel about that work. But I think it was I can't explain how incredibly motivating and empowered and energized all of those staff who were involved with it were, and how important now they feel the process is of implementing those service standards. So I would say, without flooding, the process itself with staff, make sure as many people are involved as possible within the organisation, or kind of certainly touching on it and experiencing it and enjoying it, and getting the benefit from the process itself as well as the output, because I think it did shift the way those staff approached their work and how they thought about what they produced. What would be the final thing? I think the final thing is you've got to, once you've done it, you've got to deliver it. You can't put people through that process and then uh, become complacent about, actually getting it in place. And that requires a lot of work. It requires um, the entire organization to be on board. So you really need leadership involved, and you need to be bringing it back in front of people all the time to make sure it lands. Because we know what it's like. One day something's the priority, and then next week something else comes along, and that's a priority, and then next month there's another priority. So actually keeping it back in the forefront of people's minds, taking it to scrutiny, taking it to leadership team, taking it to meetings, repeated training sessions, repeated messaging is really important, so it stays in the forefront and you don't allow yourself to lose any momentum in delivering it. Because I think that's where it would be destructive to have gone through that process with residents and then not take it seriously. So I think they're the three things.
Sophie, that was amazing. We've run out of time, but thanks for your time. And I generally have loved that episode.
Thank you.
You've been listening to myself, Matt Masters, and Sophie Evans, Director of Customer Delivery at the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. We've been talking about co-creation. Have a look on the website at the case studies page for more information. But thank you and goodbye for now.